painting for me it's more than a material, it's more than just a gesture, it's a full language, and I think that the digital readily accommodates that. My name's James Frew, and I'm an artist and I'm a lecturer. My practice currently focuses on expanded post-digital painting, and as a lecturer I teach on an international foundation programme in association with Winchester School of Art. Since I was a young lad, I was drawing, and I've always just been really creative. So I think just from an early age, it's just kind of been this innate desire to create. My early relationship with painting was mostly about traditional representational work, but you tend to find as you kind of go through the education system, the higher up you go, the work becomes a bit more conceptual. So I went from being a sort of painterly painter who was very sort of, traditional and representational, to someone who was more interested in the conceptual ideas of painting. What could painting become, more than just being oil on canvas? And I think that really began when I did my master's degree and I was introduced to more conceptual artists. One of my tutors introduced me to the idea of the post-digital, and that really sort of resonated with me as a sort of formalism. It was very, and still is very, sort of the now. And for me, again, tying into sort of my interests in expanded painting, it was another way for painting to expand. So it was another way of looking at how painting could operate as something that was digital and not just physical. The musician Kim Cascone originally framed this idea in the early 2000s, and he basically defines post-digital art as, or the post-digital, should I say, as the idea that the digital and digital technology has just saturated everyone's lived experience. So as opposed to the digital revolution of the mid-20th century, where digital technology was this new thing that people were really in awe of, now we're in this sort of age where technology is everywhere, it saturates every aspect of the human lived experience. And for me, that's how I would define the post-digital. And within post-digital art, within post-digital painting specifically, it's about how painting jumps onto the back of that discourse and engages with the parameters of the digital, how it translates, how it transmutes, how it becomes this digitally expanded entity. I love this concept of painting as data. Painting is more than just a material, so I would say it's, painting, paint the act, but also the material. It transcends, a singular definition. And I think that for me, the main idea is to look at how painting operates as part of a discourse, as a language. So for me, how is a painting composed of bits and bytes, ones and twos, like as a physical thing, okay? Is it pixelated? Is it fragmented? How is that physically, optically quantified? But then, and I think more interestingly, is painting as a form of information. It can be translated, okay, and I call that sort of transmission. But through my work, I would also call painting that kind of moves from one context and translates to another sort of digital location as a hyperfacture. So hyper taken from things like hyperlinks, being able to be translated, transcoded, and facture being sort of characteristic way an artist affects their mark on a surface. So for me, that's where it really is quite interesting how there can be variations and variants of painting. And I think that's a really interesting part of painting within that digital arena, is that it can exist like that. It's not just this physical thing, it's this multitude of locations, of versions, of variants. Painting, image and language, for me, they all kind of come together. I think that within a digital lived experience, within a digital discourse, we're very besotted with the idea of the image, with the visual. But for me, I'm really interested in the idea of language and text as image. When we go online, we're really interested in sort of images and how they come at us really fast, because it's easy to sort of engage with an image as opposed to sort of reading through reams of text. But for me, one of the most interesting aspects of the online experience is looking at text, whether that be within comment sections, whether that be through text messages, through emails. I think that there's something really interesting about how text presents itself as image, and then how that then, through my work, becomes image and then recycles back into that digital arena when I upload these things digitally. So there's a sort of operation of sort of the cyclical operation that kind of happens, which I think is kind of interesting. Yeah, so the internet, it's one of the main subject areas of my work, and I think the incongruity of the things that you find online is just so appealing. Like, it comes from this idea that John Berger spoke about in the sort of 70s, when he talks about the sort of incongruity of media. For me, this idea that you can see something really quite profound online, whether that be through images or language or text, but then something like really profane and really transgressive the next moment. So I think that the aesthetic of the internet, particularly language, is the most interesting part for me. When I was doing my doctorate, we were in the middle of the COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns, so I didn't have access to my studio space, which was located at my university. And it was in the final year of my PhD, and I really needed to be making work, making outcomes, realising my investigations and research questions, and all of a sudden I couldn't make physical practical works. So, panic. So I thought, well, how can I use images as a sort of analogue for pigment? How could they work as a proxy? So I just started collaging images together using sort of digital photo montage, but combining that with images of analog pigment that I had taken macro photographs of. I used that quite a lot in my work. So I was combining this analog and digital language. And that then sort of progressed and snowballed into kind of what you see here, this idea that I call it digi-paintage. So it's a really clumsy portmanteau of digital painting and photo montage. And really what I do is I take snippets of language or text, I should say, from online sources, and I sort of collage that digitally using Photoshop. I don't use anything too complicated. In fact, for someone who's so interested in the post-digital, I'm actually a little bit of a Luddite when it comes to technology. But I like to sort of, stack and layer information. So from the interpolation series, the title itself, to interpolate, to insert something from one context into a different context. That's really what I do. I take things from different contexts and I kind of bring it all together. So I would say that social media has absolutely changed the idea of viewership, of audience. I think we've seen that really quite acutely during pandemic restrictions, when a lot of art galleries were putting shows online. So again, we're seeing more hybrid events and more sort of hybrid ways of engaging with art. A lot of gallerists nowadays find new artists through online, and I think, of course, that's a good thing, it's also a bad thing. But in many ways, it expands the potential for engagement. And just like the new media object, which exists in multiple versions and places and variants, so is this idea of audience. You can reach a much wider global audience through the use of things like social media and the internet. And again, I think when done cleverly, the artwork can exist as this digital thing online and can use social media as a way to take on a new sort of integrity, to take on this new digital morphological presence that it couldn't do physically. I think that whilst for me the bricks and mortar gallery space can never be replaced, it can certainly be augmented, it can certainly be changed, it can certainly transform into this thing that isn't just physical. as a painter or as an artist, it's just really important to be curious about the potential of what painting can be. You know, I think that it's really important to always sort of stay curious as to what, you know, the formalism that you're operating within can do. You know, and I think for me, looking at digital technologies and emerging analog technologies is a way to kind of push the possibilities of something, and I think it's really important just to always be pushing that and not kind of, you know, resting on what you're comfortable with. You know, as I said, I went from being quite a staunch traditional representational painter to now someone who regards themselves as a sort of expanded artist. So I went from being a strict painter to someone whose work actually perhaps follows more of a conceptual formalism. So I think always just keep pushing yourself, you know.